Welcome to Ask a Deer Processor. Today we ask, hey Chuck, how do you break down a deer?
When we disassemble this carcass, we're going to first remove the one free back leg. Then we're going to remove the shoulders from each side. We're going to remove the loin down both sides of the spinal column, and then we will be removing any of the other portions of meat from the flank and from the neck. We're doing this boneless. One of the main reasons why we're doing it boneless is it allows us a great amount of flexibility in producing very desirable cuts from the back leg and the loin. And one food safety reason is because any contamination that we come across we can easily remove that. Any portions of the carcass which are not going to be edible because of the shot placement with the bullet or the arrow, we can easily remove that. And the other reason is by doing it boneless, then any parts of that carcass which might be hazardous to human health, particularly that associated with the spinal column and the head. In some areas of the United States, we have issues with chronic wasting disease, and the ability of transmitting that to humans has not been shown at this time. However, it's one of those things that just better to be safe than sorry. So we're going to be removing this meat from this carcass without potentially contaminating that meat with any of the materials associated with the nervous system, the brain, or the spinal column. Also, we're not going to be using any meat from the inside of the rib cage because this deer has been field dressed out in the field, and though we've tried to do a good job of rinsing it when we've field dressed it and also when we're cutting, we just don't want to run the risk of any contamination from bacteria from the digesta that might be on the inside of the rib cage and contaminating our food. You as a processor yourself, you can make the determination whether you want to save the ribs for food or not, or whether you just want to leave the meat on the inside of the carcass and that between the ribs, leave that to go into scrap rather than into your food, but that's your choice. Okay. We've got this deer hanging by one back leg, and we're going to start by separating the free leg from the pelvic bone, and by cutting through at the joint where the femur and the pelvic bone are joined up. Trying to keep our knife running right along the bone so that we can leave as much of the edible meat on the leg as we can. That pelvic bone kind of has a shape that kind of curves out towards the outside of the carcass, and we're just letting our knife run along that pelvic bone, and we can now cut that back leg loose from the rest of the carcass. On the front legs, there is no bone attachment point attaching the front leg shoulder to the rest of the carcass. So what we're going to do is start there on the above the shoulder, cutting through the meat, staying away from the loin, and we're basically just cutting in what would be the armpit of that carcass, okay? So in removing that shoulder, we're going to basically just cut into the armpit, and gravity and you pulling will pull that meat away from the carcass, and we're able to take our knife and just run it down right on the inside portion of that shoulder blade and remove that front leg from the carcass. After we've removed the front legs, we're going to make a cut right down on either side of the dorsal spinal processes, which project towards the back from the spine. Make another cut, and you can feel with your knife, and you're just allowing your knife to run right along those bones. Then, start on the other side. Then on where we've removed the back leg and that cartilage on the hip bone is right there. We're just going to make a cut right straight across, perpendicular to the loin, which allows us to get a hold of the loin, and we'll start trimming, kind of teasing that loin away, pulling and trimming that loin muscle away from the spinal column, and then farther down we'll start getting into where the ribs are. We'll be taking the loin away from the ribs. You can see the ribs start showing up there. We get down to the bottom of the loin, we'll cut it off and put it on our cutting table. Now we'll go ahead and remove our other loin. We're pulling straight down, pulling that loin away as we allow our knife to separate the loin from the backbone. Now we've removed most of the major cuts from that carcass, other than we still got the one back leg hanging there, and we've got still got the tenderloins on the inside of the carcass. But right now we're going to go ahead and remove the rest of the edible tissue from that carcass. Most all of this material is going to be going into ground products like burger or sausage. You could cut it up into small pieces for stew meat also. If any of that meat has got any contamination on it, any blood clots or anything, we want to remove those before we lay the cuts of meat on the table, or we at least want to make sure that the tissue that we put on the table is clean with the contaminated stuff, not in contact with the table. So we want to keep our cutting table as clean as we can. And here we're just trying to remove any of the wholesome bits of meat from the carcass. Taking the meat off of the flank, off the rib cage, and now just removing the meat from the neck. Now that we've gotten all the bits removed from the carcass, we're going to go ahead and open up the flank to allow us easy access to the tenderloins, which are on the inside of the body cavity. Just take care not to cut into the tenderloin as you're dropping the flank. Making a cut down the spinal column, and then we're going to take and make a cut perpendicular to the muscle up there where it joins onto the back leg, up by the hip bone, and we're going to roll that tenderloin out. As you're pulling that tenderloin out, if you're careful, you're able to leave the contaminated tissue in the body cavity and pull off any of the contaminated tissue before you lay it down on the lay the tenderloin down on the cutting table. Again, cutting the head of the tenderloin loose from the pelvic bone, and then just pulling and trimming the tenderloin loose from the carcass. Any of the material that's contamination, the fat that's on there, we can pull that right off, leaving a fairly clean tenderloin that will require minimal trimming. What we have left is the one back leg, then the rest of the carcass, which is we're going to treat as being inedible. We're going to go ahead and just break this rib cage down and put it in a barrel so that we can easily take the loin and the spinal column and the pelvic bone loose from the other back leg. Some type of saw is makes this job a lot easier. We're not really using the saw to cut through any cuts of meat. We're just breaking down the skeletal system so that we can go ahead and easily remove the hip bone from this back leg. Oftentimes it's easy to if there is any contamination on the back leg, on this one here, it's easy to go ahead and trim that loose it's easy to trim that contamination loose prior to breaking down the pelvic bone from the back leg. Get into the joint there where the femur and the hip bone is. Cut through the ligament that's holding the bone together, and then just following the bone to remove that pelvic bone from the back leg. And here on the table are the portions we're now going to break down. We've got the 2 tenderloins. We've got 2 back legs, 2 shoulders, 2 loins, and then other bits that we're going to trim up, removing any contamination and blood clots to go into further processed items like burger or sausage.
Thanks again to Riverbend Wild Game and Sausage Company. You can learn more about Illinois Learn to Hunt at learntohuntil.com.